Good morning. Um, in keeping with my promise to try to do a YouTube video every morning at 10 o'clock, I'm going to continue on today. And today, what I'm talking about is persona versus the shadow and manifest evil. And this is a very complicated topic, but it's a very important one for the BTS Army. So, good morning. Welcome. Today I'm talking about uh, shadow and manifest evil and the fact that persona is one of a pair of opposites that Dr. Jung talked about. And just for a moment, I'm going to wait for a few more people to join us. And I am trying to get up my YouTube on my other iPhone. The number of people that have come to me over the last few days is really amazing, and I'm very pleased by that. And so I've the issue is, though, it's challenging my technology, and so I'm in the process of upgrading my equipment, and so I have to broadcast today off my iPhone, and I apologize for any inconvenience that may cause. And what I'm going to do, I'm just trying to get the chat up um, so that I can, um, and let's see how we go about doing that. I had it up the other day, and then, oh, here we go. Maybe this is going to do it. Okay. And then, oh, here we go. Maybe this is going to do it. Okay. Then, oh, here we go. Maybe this is going to do it. So I have to turn down the sound on my other cell phone so you don't get feedback from it. But now I will be able to watch the chat. So Stefania Montoya and CM Terbush, welcome, and to the other folks that are here. Now, I realize that the BTS Army is not going to have, most people are not going to have access to this book. Jung's Map of the Soul, Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction by Murray Stein. And I've had this book in audio for many years, but I never had it in hard copy. And so now, because of this interest that you folks have been showing, I got it in hard copy because I think that there are some things that we need to address in it. So what I'm going to do today, because I know most people won't have access to it immediately, and especially come Friday when the new BTS album drops, people are not going to have access to it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some sections that I think are important over the next few days, and to give everybody that's listening to my videos at least an opportunity to know what's in it. And so I'm going to monitor your chats here, hopefully, and I trust that that will work well. But to begin with, I'm going to read from this book, and I'm reading from Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction by Murray Stein. And Dr. Stein is a leading Jungian analyst in Zurich. And he wrote this book 20 years ago, so I think he's probably quite happy with the fact that his book, which he wrote 20 years ago, is suddenly a bestseller. And welcome, Hunger Stormy. I had some responses for you, but I haven't been able to get to them yet. So anyway, I'm reading from Murray Stein's book, and there's a sub chapter in a chapter called, in chapter 5. talks about the revealed and the concealed in relations with others. And there's a subtitle here, Integrating Persona and Shadow. So I want to read that to you, and then we're going to come back and talk about this pair of opposites. So, integrating persona and shadow. The shadow and persona are a classic pair of opposites, standing in the psyche as polarities of the ego. Since the overall task of psychological development, individuation, discussed in Chapter 8, is integration, and wholeness is the overarching and supreme value, we need to ask here, in a preliminary way at least, what does it mean to integrate persona and shadow? In the context of this chapter's topic, integration hinges on self-acceptance, on fully accepting those parts of oneself that do not belong in the persona image, which is itself usually an image of an ideal, or at least of a cultural norm. And, okay, so the persona aspects of which one is ashamed are often felt to be radically evil. While some things truly are evil and destructive, frequently shadow material is not evil. It is only felt to be so because of the shame attached to it due to its nonconformity with the persona. What is it like when somebody has achieved a measure of integration between persona and shadow? Jung quotes a letter from a former patient, written some time after he saw her for analysis. Quote, "Out of evil much good has come to me. By keeping quiet, repressing nothing, remaining attentive, and by accepting reality, taking things as they are and not as I wanted them to be. By doing all this, unusual knowledge has come to me, and unusual powers as well, such as I could never have imagined before. I always thought that when we accepted things, they overpowered us in some way or other. This turns out not to be true at all. It is only by accepting them that one can assume an attitude towards them. So now I intend to play the game of life, being receptive to whatever comes to me, good and bad, sun and shadow, forever alternating, and in this way also accepting my own nature, with its positive and its negative sides. Thus everything becomes more alive to me. What a fool I was! How I tried to force everything to go according to the way I felt it ought to go." Unquote. This woman has stepped back both from the persona and from splitting the persona and shadow into opposites, and she is now simply observing, reflecting on, and accepting her psyche as it comes to her, then sorting, seeing what it was about, and making some choices. She has created a psychological distance between the ego complex and the persona, as well as between the ego and the shadow. She is no longer possessed on either end of the spectrum. Jung holds that opposites are united in the psyche through the intervention of a third thing. A conflict between opposites, persona and shadow, for example, can be regarded as an individuation crisis, an opportunity to grow through integration. Coming into conflict are collective values on the persona side and shadow aspects of the ego that belong to the individual's native instinctual makeup, Freud's id. Also, some that are derivative from the archetypes and the unconscious complexes. Since shadow content is not acceptable to the persona, the conflict may be fierce. Jung held that if the two poles are held in tension, a solution will appear if the ego can let go of both if the ego can let go of both and create an inner vacuum in which the unconscious can offer a creative solution in the form of a new symbol. This symbol will present an option for movement ahead that will include something of both, not simply a compromise, but an amalgam that calls forth a new attitude on the part of the ego and a new kind of relation to the world. This process can be observed as people develop both in therapy and through life experience. As they outgrow their former conflicts, assume new personas, and integrate formerly unacceptable parts of the self, people do change through therapy and in the course of life development. The persona, as a tool of adaptation, has a great potential for change. It can become increasingly flexible, given that the ego is willing to modify old patterns. Stories such as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde describe a complete split between persona and shadow. In these stories, there is no integration, only fluctuation back and forth between the opposites. Shadow roles and impulses are acted out without the appearance of a transcendent function to bring about an integration of those opposites. One wonders about people in real life who cannot integrate such opposites. In some cases, the dark side may be so extreme and so highly charged with energy that its integration with a socially acceptable persona of any kind is impossible. Today, the only solution to this problem is psychotropic medicine, which can put a severe damper on the unconscious and inhibit the shadow's power sources. In such cases, the ego is too unstable and weak to moderate impulsivity enough to allow for the constellation of the transcendent function. Now, there's quite a lot in that particular passage. I've been reading from Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction by Dr. Murray Stein. And what I want to point out is that yesterday we were invaded by trolls. And those trolls represent the shadow of the internet economy. People that can hide behind their troll persona do things that come out of the shadow of society. And sometimes they do evil things also, which is why I'm talking about both persona versus shadow and evil today. And so now I do have your chats on my other iPhone, so I will be able to follow you and I will respond to you. But today, you saw, if you were here yesterday, you would have seen me get a little flustered by the invasion of the trolls. And a number of you were quite upset by that. But what we need to note is that this is a teaching, and those trolls represent the shadow side, and in some cases the evil side, because as we know, many BTS Army folks are very young, and so it's really evil to attack the weak ego of a very young person. That's truly an evil act. And so in Jungian psychology and in life, we need to build a strong ego so that we can face the shadow and we can face evil. We need to be able to differentiate what is good and what is evil. And then we need to decide for the good, because obviously the evil tears down society. If you look around you, wherever you're sitting right now, and look out the window if you can, everything that you can see, every single thing that you can see, including yourself, with the possible exception of potted plants, which live on instinct and living fauna or flora outside your window, everything else is the result of good, because good things survive and are adopted by everyone. And so they survive and then they become things. They become iPhones, they become computers, they become BTS, for example. But bad things get crushed out of the system, and evil things get crushed out of the system. Sometimes it's fairly easy to do that, and sometimes it's manifest evil is so terrible that it can cause 175 million violent deaths, as it did in the 20th century with World Wars One and Two and various other wars around the world during that period of time. And so when wars come up, you know that evil is afoot. That's more than just shadow, because shadow content we can deal with in our societies. But when we have to go to war, then we're dealing with manifest evil there. And so we've been talking about the fact that there's a pair of opposites in the psyche. That pair of opposites is persona versus shadow. And there's nothing wrong with shadow per se. We all have it. If you had seen me 20 minutes ago, I was taking a I was taking a shower, trying to get ready, but I wouldn't have wanted you to see that side of me. I only want you to see my persona, which is what you're seeing right now. And so, but the fact is, I have to take a shower and I have to shave, and so that part of me isn't bad per se. It's just a part of me that's not part of my persona, and we need that part. But when it gets out of hand, as it did yesterday during our chat, then you start to see manifest evil coming in. And so I have set the chats on this video and future videos. They're all set for moderation, which means if people use foul language, they're going to be moderated and you're not even going to see that chat. To the extent that they've learned to get around it, then we're getting a demonstration of shadow in our life. And we do have demonstrations of shadow throughout society. And one of the important things that we have to do with our ego is develop it strong enough so that we can recognize what's good and what's evil and decide for the good. And as I said, only good things stick around. Bad things get pushed out of the system constantly. Okay, so now let me go back to your comments and then I'll carry on. And so, C.M. Terbush, I was reading from Jung's Map of the Soul, an introduction by Mary Stein, and I was reading initially from page 122, and that's in the English version, of course, and that was a section called Integrating Persona and Shadow, and that's an opposite. So in Jungian psychology, opposites are called a syzygy. That means that they're yoked together. You can't get them apart. It's yin and yang, and both are in the economy of the universe. And so if you have persona, you're definitely going to have shadow. And so that is an important idea to understand as we listen to BTS's new album and look at their lyrics. Okay, so I'm going to skip by greetings and just come to the meat of things here. And so, what I'm going to do today, by the way, is if we are attacked by hackers again, I'm going to let them run, and I'm not going to get upset about it because now I've integrated this. You saw yesterday um, a very emotional reaction from me. Okay, so that was a reaction up here and in the spur of the moment, and it wasn't a very considered reaction. But when, in the fullness of time, and as I was looking through my new book and found that particular section, I knew that that was the right answer. And so I've been able to integrate this experience of the shadow elements overnight. And so that's why I'm not going to get upset about it today. I'm going to let them run, and they will be an example of the shadow. And if they're using things that violate YouTube's terms of service, I will block them and I will file reports against them. And by the way, I think users can file reports just by, if you see on a chat something that ought to be reported to YouTube, just go to that particular chat, and on the right side you'll see three vertical dots, dot, dot, dot. And if you click on that, it gives you an option to report a chat. And so what I urge you to do is go ahead and report any abusive chats. And then after today's presentation, I will come back and remove those if they haven't been removed. But for the time being and for the purposes of this live stream, I'm going to allow any hacking to run. All right, so one person who is Korean says, I really want to understand those difficult English. Thank you, sir. You wonderful live to share. Hunger says, I'm not sure if I understood it correctly. When it comes to the shadow, does that mean that the negative side of one's personality, or it can also apply to one's true self? It can be that, yes, definitely. Miles says, please share this important message to your friends in BTS Army. I do think that that's going to be important because people need to understand if BTS itself and RM have made this entirely about the persona, they may not have quite uh, gotten to the point that persona is an opposite from shadow. And it's very important to understand that in order to understand persona properly. Um, and and Siemter Bush, you say us to realize our true self. Okay, I'm not really getting into true self here. Self is a very complicated idea, and I am going to talk about it in future um, talks. I can show you this though. Um, this is volume 9, small Roman numeral 2, 9-2 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. It's called Ion, and you see that the subtitle is Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self. And so this entire book is looking at various examples of self as it appeared through the ages. And in our advanced reading group, we've done an entire seminar, which was 32 sessions of about an hour and a half each. So about 50 hours of seminar video is available in our advanced reading group. And so if you want to join our advanced reading group, you can find some information about it under this, um, excuse me. Yeah, you can find information about it in the description of this video, and you can also always DM me um, at skip_Conover on Twitter, and we can have a conversation. Um, And Hunger says, oh, okay, okay, thank you. Iden O'Connor Power, what do you think of Uber Boyo's Ion series? I think that Uber Boyo's Ion series is terrific. It's certainly a different take on Jungian psychology, but it is very powerful and it's very youthful and very energetic. And so I urge you to take a look at Uber Boyo's Ion series. And I have done an interview with Uber Boyo with Stephen Fox and James P. Dowling, the two Uber Boyos. And you can find that interview on this YouTube channel and under a playlist called Interviews. It was one of my first interviews, and it was a terrific interview. We enjoyed it very much, and we've now become friends. So, anyway, so let's see. Hunger says, yes, we did report some trolls yesterday. So, malgré tout, we respect your great work, your persona, and we support you, sir. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Hello, sir. What's the spiritual meaning of persona? Thanks. Well, everything in our psyche is spiritual in a way. And you have to realize there's a funny paradox actually in Jungian psychology, because Dr. Jung always tried to distinguish between psychology and theology. And part of that probably was because he was a son of a Swiss Reformed pastor, and he didn't want to offend his uncles. He had seven uncles who were also Swiss Reformed pastors. And so he was seeing something different from what they were seeing as Christian ministers. And so he kept emphasizing that he was only talking about what he could demonstrate from his own clinic. So his empirical findings from his psychological clinic. And whenever people talked about God that theologians speak of, he said, oh, that's the metaphysical God. I never talk about the metaphysical God. I am only talking about the God image that I can demonstrate is an actual fact in the deepest archetype of the human species. And that's sometimes called the self, the God image, or the greater personality. It has other names too. But in any case, the point was that he was distinguishing between his psychology, which he considered a science, and which I consider a science, and the metaphysical God of the theologians. But the problem is, the paradox in that is that everything psychological is metaphysical. Okay, we can't touch it. We can talk about it. We can point at it. We can describe it, but you can't feel it. You can't touch. I mean, you can feel it. Excuse me. You can feel it, but you can't touch it, taste it, hear it, see it. You have to think about it, and then you know. So it is metaphysical. That's the irony and the paradox. And let's see here. So in a way, and because of that, everything in the psyche is in a way spiritual. And Dr. Jung, in Answer to Job, in paragraph 752 of Answer to Job, he said every religious statement is a statement of the psyche without exception, and it's not a statement of the physical world. Okay, so that was referring to religion, but that's also referring to psychology. So in a way, it's all spiritual. I've Got Strength says, hello, from my experience with war, nowadays we have a constant stream of information, and it's easy enough to divide people, pouring certain kinds of info into the news if a person is inclined to believe in a certain story, then it's hard to make him see the other side of the story. That's very true. And this is why humanity and the human personality, all humanity, we have to rise up to a higher level of consciousness because we have to get above these narratives so that we can look down at them. And so this is why Dr. Edinger talked about 6 stages of religious development and pointed out that the 6th stage is individuation and psychology. And so we're entering that stage now. That's the stage that Dr. Jung showed the entrance to. And so we have to differentiate. And it's quite clear that the BTS team, all members of the team, um, have recognized this fact that we have to move up, that we have to start talking about mental health. We can't just let it be a taboo anymore. And so when we do talk about it, we're going to raise our consciousness. Now, remember, we have to distinguish between awareness and consciousness because um, it can be quite confusing. You can say, oh, I'm conscious. Well, actually, no, you're not. And neither am I. We're all aware. If we're on this conversation right now, we're all aware. So we have eyes, ears, mouth. We can take things in, and that's awareness. But uh, you know, a tarantula has awareness to a certain extent, and so does a tiger or an elephant. Every creature, even protozoa, even single-celled organisms, have a certain level of awareness, and then they respond by instinct. But only human beings have gotten to the point of a consciousness where we can actually think about and differentiate things from our world and change the way our life is going. Primitives can't do that. Primitives are still living in the jungle and they react to stimuli, but we can react to stimuli. Like yesterday, I reacted to the stimuli of the hackers, and ultimately that instinctual reaction uh, turned out it caused me to shut down the stream yesterday. But what we have to understand is that now, overnight, and thanks to reading Dr. Stein's book and the section that I read at the very beginning of this live stream, um, I have been able to integrate that and to point out that those hackers represent the shadow and they're representing the point that I'm making in this live stream. And so they're uh, an actual example of what we're talking about. They're an example of the shadow side at the very least, and they may be um, signs of manifest evil. And so we all need to develop our um, egos to the point where we can differentiate between good and evil. And that is done by going through the Job archetype in our lives as many times as possible. So that Job archetype is contest. You come up against something and you're defeated. Defeat. 3rd stage, lamentation. You go away and you think about it, as I did last night, because we had a contest with the hackers yesterday. Um, I was defeated. It meant that I closed down the live stream, and I had to lament about that and integrate that. And then we can be reborn into something else. So now, today, I can use that as an example of what I want to teach in this live stream. And so that's an example for me. So when I get through that cycle in this last 24-hour period of contests from the hackers trying to spoil our live stream, defeat because I let my emotions decide that I had to shut down that live stream. Lamentation, my lamentation in this case was going back through Dr. Stein's book and finding the right piece that would allow me to integrate what happened and bring it into my life and then share it with you and then rebirth into what this live stream is. So if hackers are here today, I'm not going to shut them down. I'm just going to use them as an example of the shadow. If they violate YouTube's terms of service, they will be shut down by me either immediately or at immediately after when I'm working with the video. Aiden O'Connor Power says, thank you, Skip. Okay. Sentry says, thank you so much that you were talking about persona versus shadow. And Sentry says it is lagging. I'm sorry for that. I, the number of people that have been watching my videos has put a challenge on my technology. So I'm in the process of upgrading my technology, and I hope to have that all fixed in the next week or so. But in the meantime, I do have a new iPhone as of yesterday, and so I am I'm starting to use it, but I haven't even been able to back up and restore yet because my computer is too full. So I have to deal with that first. And so anyway, you are seeing me through my new iPhone XS Max 256 gigabyte hard drive. And I'm using my old iPhone 6S to follow the chat now. So now we have technology that's getting better and better. Johan says, hello, sir. Do you think we are on the cusp of a worldwide breakthrough of Jungian ideas? I certainly think that. And, it won't be for everyone, okay? There are a lot of very young folks that are following BTS. And so Jungian ideas are going to be too complex for them. And we're all at different stages of our psychological development. So, I talk about the golly gee phase because there's a Facebook group, page, managed by one of my friends who's in the advanced reading group. His name is Louis LaFontaine. He's managed that page for about 15 years now. When I joined it in 2005, he had 4,000 followers. Today, he has over 68,000 followers. I think that's the number the last time I looked on that page. And it's a very good page because he publishes a lot of Jungian quotes that are very useful. But I find that most people that go to that page are in what I call the golly gee phase. In other words, they hear about an archetype and they think, oh, wow, that's cool, and so they're yucking it up, but they don't really know what it really means. And in the end, none of us really know. I mean, we may be Jungians, but we are not Jung. And that was a famous quote of Jung's, which was, thank God I'm Jung and not a Jungian. Because we could never walk a mile in his shoes. And so we don't know 100% exactly what he was driving at. And he was very frustrated by that fact that he hadn't been able to convey that to others. But hopefully that's going to happen in the next generation. And actually, one of my favorite quotes is in this book, Ion, volume 9-2 of the collected works. And in this book, in paragraph 63, this is my favorite paragraph in this book. He's talking about the fact that people who write books and do things on a rational level don't really get the picture. And so he says, and I'll just read this paragraph to you. The shadow, the syzygy, and the self are psychic factors of which an adequate picture can be formed only on the basis of a fairly thorough experience of them. So that was an important Jungian idea that you had to have experience of things. Just as these concepts arose out of an experience of reality, so they can be elucidated only by further experience. Philosophical criticism will find everything to object to in them unless it begins by recognizing that they are concerned with facts and that the concept is simply an abbreviated description or definition of those facts. Such criticism has as little effect on the object as zoological criticism on a duck-billed platypus. So, in other words, the rationality that Jordan Peterson promotes in his 12 Rules of Life, for example, has no effect on the way we live our lives directly. And in this case, okay, zoological criticism, people can write about duck-billed platypuses and make jokes about them all they want. They can write 10 pages in an encyclopedia of zoology about the duck-billed platypus, but down in Australia where they live, they're just living their lives and they don't care what one bit, and so they have no effect. So the criticism, the zoological criticism, has nothing to do with those guys. We can describe it in rational terms, but it has nothing to do with the experience of being a duck-billed platypus. It is not the concept that matters. The concept is only a word, a counter. It has meaning and use only because it stands for a certain sum of experience. Unfortunately, I cannot pass on this experience to my public. I have tried in a number of publications, with the help of case material, to present the nature of these experiences and also the method of obtaining them. Wherever my methods were really applied, the facts I give have been confirmed. One could see the moons of Jupiter even in Galileo's day if one took the trouble to use his telescope. So that's paragraph 63 of answer to or of Ion researches into the phenomenology of the self. So going on. Nia says, I'm going to miss the first hour because I'm giving a lesson right now, but try to join at the end of the stream is still going. I can go for a while longer, about 45 minutes, but then I have my advanced reading group this afternoon, so I'm going to have to focus on that. And but Nia, please go back and listen to the beginning of this stream because I read from Dr. Stein's book, and I'm trying to give access to that information to the BTS Army, and I consider it very important. Sumter Bush say talking to Johann V, and if we are, what will that if we are, what will that mean for the current generation going forward? Hunger says, hopefully and for the better. I think so too. Johan says, thanks for expanding the question. Hope Mr. Skip will address it. I think I have addressed it, and if I haven't, please point that out to me. And Jerome says, acting spiritual can likewise be a persona mask, to cite some past gurus that were carrying a big shadow. Definitely. You know, you only have to if you're a Catholic, you only have to think of the Borgias, for example, who had popes, but they were pretty evil folks. Carlos, question: what motivates people to become interested in Jungian psychology, particularly at a young age, 18 to 25? Well, Carlos, I would say that the issue of BTS's new album, um, Map of the Soul Persona, is going to motivate a lot of young people, even younger than 18, to try to understand what we're talking about. And so I'm very excited about that, and I think it's going to spread it around the world. And Opiami says Jungian isn't complex for the young. Uh, well, Opiami, suddenly, she says it's simple as such. Well, okay. Danny Kim did that lovely video about the first song to drop in the Persona of the Soul, or Map of the Soul Persona uh, album, and it's simple. It shows a very high level uh, take on Jungian psychology. And so you can think of it as the 10,000-mile level, not even the 10,000 feet level. And so if you get taken into that, if you hear about Jungian psychology from BTS and then get interested in it, then it's a process where you're going to circumambulate the center, you're going to go around the center and get deeper and deeper and deeper for the rest of your life. And that's what's happened to me. I'm in my 33rd year of studying Jungian psychology, and I'm nowhere near the bottom yet. Um, and Sarah says, hey, sir, have a good day. Hunger. I think BTS is a good gateway to becoming interested in Jungian psychology. Then, of course, reading more books and experiencing life to what we know to relating what we know to Jung. Okay, let me also observe, I'm not a mental health professional, and and Jungian analysts are, but Dr. Jung's work has very much to do with culture and society in general. And so I can't really say anything about what method current psychotherapists use to help you if you have a severe mental disability of some sort. I know nothing about that. I've never been trained in that way. And what I know and my interest about it is the bringing of the human species up to a higher level of consciousness. So, what that means for psychology is this is an area that's completely, in some ways it's completely outside of uh, psychology as it's mostly practiced in the world today, with the exception of Jungian analysts who go very deep and they find the very deep causes and then help you to see those causes. But unlike Freud, he wanted to reduce everything down to sexuality, Dr. Jung pointed out that we have many other drives and many other archetypes going on. Dr. Freud discovered one archetype, and that was the Oedipus complex. Um, and he was right about that. Dr. Jung was always very respectful of Dr. Freud. He wrote a beautiful eulogy for Dr. Freud after his death in 1939, which you can find in the collected works. Um, so it wasn't that they were fighting so much, although perhaps Dr. Freud thought so on his side. But um, so in psychology, let's leave the psychology as a mental health thing aside. In religion, Dr. Jung penetrated to the very source of all religions, not just Christianity, although he looked at Christianity quite a lot because he was raised by a pastor and he could read Latin and Greek, so he could understand these ancient languages and understand what these people were saying. Um, but, one of the things we pointed out is that in the Bible, many of the so called miracles actually come from dreams and visions. And it says so in the Bible, it explicitly says so. And so, if we understand the Bible in that way, in a psychological way, the way Jordan Peterson explained it, we're going to help ourselves quite a lot because all the religions are grand schemes of keeping mental health balanced. Okay, and that goes for all the religions, not only Christianity, not only Judaism, not only Islam, which is also an Abrahamic religion. And many of the stories that are contained in the Bible are also contained in the Quran, including the birth of Christ, who was considered a prophet by the Muslims. So those systems were systems that kept people's mental health balanced over thousands of years, and we can't throw them out. But Dr. Jung got to a deeper level, much deeper level, the source of all religions. And that's the significance of what we're doing here and why I'm very committed to it. But it also applies to politics. I wrote a book in 2014 entitled Political Psychology: New Ideas for Activists. And that book is all about how you can apply Jungian psychology to politics. And I tried to apply it that way in that book. And so you can find that book on Amazon. I also wrote a book in 2007 called Tsunami of Blood. And in that book, I precisely predicted the rise of ISIS and the and basically what has happened since 2007. I was prophetic. Nobody listened to me, but anyway, if you want to challenge that, please go buy my book, Tsunami of Blood. And my name on political psychology is Donald L. Conover, and on Tsunami of Blood is Skip Conover. And Carlos says, that's a very prideful statement. Yeah, I probably made a prideful statement there when I'm telling you about my books. And, mostly I try to stay non prideful because my heritage is Dutch and Pennsylvania Dutch, which means German, Swedish, and Welsh. And in Pennsylvania Dutch culture, it's prideful to have buttons. And so we try not to be prideful, but I acknowledge that some of the other parts of my heritage might slip through from time to time. Hunger, not young, like young. This is something Jin would joke. Yep, maybe. We all have our way of saying it. It's not Jung. It's the J is pronounced as a Y. Jung. Nia says young people nowadays burn out even earlier. They have many questions with nobody answering or relating to them, obviously, and that's one of the things I have been trying to do on this YouTube channel for the last 3 years, and you can find 900 videos on this channel about that. Psyche says, young people of every generation have that experience, Nia. Yes, I agree with that. Nia says, yes, hence all generations look for something to relate to. And so now we have BTS coming along, and they may get it started. As I've said a few times in the last couple of weeks, I've been struggling to figure out how to get psychology in the schools, and I never could work it out because I know that religious leaders would resist it, and so we would never get it in schools. And Jungian psychology has basically been pushed out of the university because the psychologists um, want to focus on modern techniques to repress your depression. And so you can take a pill for your depression, but what that does is it represses yourself, and you don't have communication with the deepest part of your soul, and that's a problem. But anyway, it was the Freudians and the reductionists who won in modern mental health. And so Dr. Jung's work is pretty much not available in the United States, with the exception of Pacifica Graduate Institute, Saybrook University, and a couple of others. Uh, there's a professor at Vanderbilt named Volney Gay, Gay. Okay, and Volney has written a complete bibliography of Jung's work, and that's very valuable. It's available on the internet. Hunger says, Opiami, it depends on the individual. Not everyone could understand this easily. Some would take time. And I would say that everyone that reads Dr. Jung's work is going to take a lifetime to fully understand it. But, there is hope. After a little time, you can at least understand the vocabulary. Carlos says, however, many people never develop a personal interest in Jung, while others develop interest at different times in life. Perhaps there is something in the self driving this interest. Right. And in society, societies have a self too, in the collective unconscious. And so, what's about to happen is that BTS is going to drop this album on Friday, and suddenly, way more people are even going to hear about Jung. I mean, plenty of people haven't heard about Jung before this. And so, people will come in at different levels, and then they will use it as it supports them, which is what I've done for the last 32 years. But that didn't mean that I um, understood everything from the beginning, certainly not. I still don't, but I've got strength says these sessions helped me to understand about the writer's block. I had it for several years. Diving into BTS helped me to finally write another poem. Terrific. That's when you're writing a poem, that's connection with the self. So that's a very good thing. Psyche. In fact, the search for answers never truly stops. There are people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., who still seek. And one of my local members is 77, and she was at the table the other night in our session. You can hear her talking, and she is quite taken by what's happening with BTS. So, going on, Albiame. It takes time and interest and whether it matters to you, surely. Uh, and I've got strength. There are different advices for overcoming the writer's block, but they didn't feel as profound to me. I'm pleased to hear that I'm helping you. Nia says, most of my knowledge comes from happening to hear about SGSB, happening to mention SG. I'm not sure what those references are. I have an inner drive to learn, but most knowledge spreads through accidental lucky encounters. And that's the way it works for all of us. We all learn by our experiences. Um, Hunger says, yes, some folks need to experience things in life first, and then, oh, I finally get it. And, Dr. Jung's emphasis here was that in psychology, you don't get it until you've had the experience. Then you get it. And so I can, you can read the Jung's work verbatim time and again and not get it. But then if you have an experience, boom, you get it. And this is why Dr. Jung could say, I have no need to believe, I know. And Destiny says, I was 19 when I first discovered Jung. How cool to see people even younger being introduced to these ideas. even if they don't grasp much right away, it's something that you carry with you through life. Absolutely. Joy says, most of my knowledge is based off my experiences with friends deeply rooted in the pagan belief system and wanting to understand that more. Um, Fair enough. Pagan beliefs typically came out of instinctual urges, and but most people that say they're pagan don't even understand that and the origins of paganism. And Dr. Jung pointed out that when somebody gets pushed back and has a defeat in life, often they will regress to a prior level. And one of those levels he mentions in his work is paganism. Um, and Opiami says, Stormy, first person experience is best. That's absolutely true. Carlos, thank you for answering. I completely agree. Since I began developing interest, I've only become more interested in going deeper and deeper. Hunger. I was in my teens when I became interested in Jung's work, but I couldn't understand a thing he was talking about. Well, that's why I'm here. I'm trying to help folks bridge that gap. I hope for the future that will be better. Obviously, I'm no expert, but since I've grown and experienced more in life versus during my teens at least, I have an idea now. And it's nice we're having this discussion now. Everyone's prophetic, says Opiami. Right. Okay. And so prophecy, there's a writer named Peter Kingsley who has written uh, broadly about Jung and about antiquity and about prophecy. And he's just published a book called Catafalque. Let me see if I can get that so I can show it to you. Okay, so this book is actually in 2 volumes, Catafalque, by Peter Kingsley, and it's Carl Jung and the End of Humanity. Very cheery title, but actually this is a 2 volume book. The second volume is all the footnotes for the first volume. So the first volume is text, and it's a very powerful book, and it does talk about prophecy both in the ancient world and Jung. Mainly, he says that if you know history, then you can prophesy what will happen in the future. And unfortunately, as I know, there's the curse of Cassandra. Cassandra was a figure in the Trojan War, and Cassandra had the gift of being able to predict the future, but the curse was that no one would ever believe her. And so I suffer from this curse personally. I can predict the future, but no one will believe me. So I wrote Tsunami of Blood in 2007. No one believed me, and therefore we had the Tsunami of Blood that's followed 2007, including the onslaught of ISIS. And um, so I have that gift of prophecy. Nobody believes me. I have the gift of prophesying that BTS is going to make a huge difference in the world. But I think many of my friends who don't know much about Jungian psychology don't believe me, but they are about to see. And so, but my prediction is it's going to make a major change in the thinking in the world over the next 20 years at least. Centerbush says, I started reading Jung in my early 20s and have recently began reading again with greater appreciation and understanding. Opiame, I know what's going to happen tomorrow. Um, Me too. GLJ Angel says, hello from UK. I'm late, but we'll catch up on the beginning of the upload. And definitely you need to do that because I was reading from Dr. Stein's book at the beginning of this session. And so you'll find that reading. You will find that reading in the beginning of the playback. And I'm trying to make that available to BTS folks around the world so that you'll have access to that information at least. Miles says, I find that I have written and drawn things before understanding their meaning, but with Skip and Jung, I am seeing the meaning. Weird. Great. I hope so. That's part of the purpose here. And Opiami says, what algorithm? I'm not sure what you're referring to, Opiami. Hunger says, now that you've mentioned that, I'll ask my friend and sister who took up psych in if they studied Jung's work in college, though they mention Jung to keep me every though they mention Jung to me every now and then, but not this deep. My daughter she's a psychology major, and when she was taking her Psychology 101 course, I opened it to see what it said about Jung, and it had about 2 paragraphs, that's all. And it's simply not possible to understand anything about C.G. Jung at depth with 2 paragraphs. And, as I say, I've done a lot of adjunct teaching over the years. I've done 7 years of adjunct teaching overall, and mostly in finance and business law. And so I thought, well, maybe I could do some adjunct teaching on Jung. So I wrote all the major colleges and universities in my area, and no one was interested. The psychology professors are threatened if you go to them, and the deans won't talk to me because the psychology professors are threatened. So I haven't been able to get it in any of the colleges and universities here. So in the great tradition of Jordan Peterson, I'm intending this to be my own university. And so please take it for what it's worth. Hunger says, or no, I'm sorry. Opium, Mamma Mia, this is lag speech and talk, but I don't mind. Yeah, my suggestion, since there's nothing special going on in the screen, I suggest you just close your eyes and listen, or or just pay attention to the chat stream, and don't worry about what I look like on the screen. There's nothing special there. Senator Bush says, I am a medieval history major, and studying history does help you see patterns and get an intuitive feel for where things may be headed. And definitely, and I'm a history major from my undergraduate time, and I definitely know that. If you don't know history, you're destined to repeat it, as is said and is very true. Carlos says, I've noticed a particular persona in theologians and psychologists in their speech and mannerisms. It's difficult to explain what it is, but it's like an intense attention. What is that? Well, they learn that they have to pay attention to the people they're talking to. And, I once had a conversation with James Hollis, who's a very famous author and Jungian psychoanalyst or analyst. And James Hollis is the president of the Jung Society of Washington, and he actually has his office at the Jung Society of Washington. And I wanted to speak with him at one point about trying to promote Jungian psychology more, and so he graciously did agree to meet me over lunchtime one day, and he gave me an hour and a half of his time. And when we sat down together, his attention toward me was so focused and so powerful that it nearly blew me over. I mean, looked at him and I go, whoa, you know, that's intense. And so I know what you mean. And that's the profession. They're interested in understanding you and what makes you tick and what they can do to help you. Um, but I'm not sure I can, other than that experience, give you any more professional answer than that. Joy says, so my twin sister who's always dreaming of people's death is considered prophecies. Well, a dream about someone's death probably is not a prophecy. It's probably some sort of warning, certainly, and it's herself communicating with her some message that it thinks you need. But it can be many things, and as you know, I don't analyze the dreams of others, but I certainly can, bring a couple of things in my own idea about what that might be. That it could be a message if you're dreaming about your mother and your mother's death. It could be a warning to you that, hey, pay attention to your mother because she's alive now and someday she won't be with you. And so you need to enjoy the relationship with your mother. It's not precisely, or it's not specifically saying your mother's going to die. Heck, we're all going to die. So it's not that. It's really uh, trying to give you a message. Your psyche, yourself, is trying to tell you something it thinks you need to know. And one of the it things it might think you need to know in that kind of a dream is that these older people in your life are not going to be here forever. And so maybe you should move away from uh, whatever it is you're doing and pay a little more attention to that person. Um, and Opiami says adjunct teaching is valid. Yes, it's valid if you can do it, but um, if the universities are trying to repress your information, then you can't do it. Center Bush, did Jung ever mention a dreamscape, a place where you can shape your dreams as you are dreaming? He certainly did. And that's called active imagination. And that's what the Red Book is about. So you can take a look at the Red Book, and these were Dr. Jung's own dreams and visions. And he certainly had a dreamscape. And I think he would have called that an active imagination, and it works. And I can tell you that I wrote my novel entirely from the self in such a dreamscape where I was visioning the things that were happening in the novel. Nia, if nobody gives one a platform, thankfully nowadays we can create our own. Yes, absolutely. Although the technical difficulties are stressful at times. Boy, do I ever believe that. Okay, so there's a moderated statement here. I want to just look at it. Okay, I'm gonna show that. Um, this person who identifies as American military equals freedom says that because nobody is above the law, a judicial watch is also on YouTube and it sues for documents. So I'm going to show that comment. That's very true. Carlos says, yes, you do know what I mean. Miles, after a person gets some handle on Jung, they should go back to their holy books and read them again. What do you think? Absolutely. I think that that's entirely true. And it doesn't matter which religion we're talking about, they all um, are true. Okay, in other words, Dr. Jung said every um, religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche, and that means they represent psychic facts. And so, in all religions, the religious books came from the psyche and are psychic facts. And so, in that sense, not only the Bible, but also the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran and any other religious book is 100% true as psychic facts for somebody in the world. But that does not mean that they are physical facts. And that's the distinction that Dr. Jung finally drew and finally made me understand. But all of these holy books are teachings, and they're intended to bring us along. And, it's just like cable news is trying to bring you along in one way or another, 7 by 24 by 365, and they have their own narratives. And so the point about ego and deciding is we have to decide for ourselves what's true. And, Jesus is reported to have said this, and you can find in the first letter of John, 1 John, which appears in the back of the book, in the back of the Bible, 1 John 4 1. That's the verse, chapter 4, verse 1. And basically, that verse says, remember to test the spirits. So everybody's trying to convince you of something. I'm actually not trying to convince you of anything. I'm only trying to make you aware of what I know about Jungian psychology, but you have to decide for yourself whether it's true or not. And and so everybody's trying to make you believe something, and you have to decide for yourself. And if all of us individuate to the point where we can decide for ourselves what's true and what's false, we're going to be much happier. Because, as I said, everything that you can see in your room, with the exception of potted plants, is a function of the psyche. I mean, even your kitty cats, and even you, because you were once a twinkle in your father's eye, okay, honestly. And so that was a psychic fact at that time. Um, and Opiami says, I have night terrors, don't know how to stop it, much as I try. Well, Opiami, I would suggest that maybe you start with Man and His Symbols, which is the book that Dr. Jung had written for laymen. And I found that I read that book in 1990 to my wife. And what we would do is every night we would go to bed and I would read 3 or 4 pages of that book every night. And that went on for a year. And at the end of the year, I felt I'd had a year of psychoanalysis um, or psychotherapy. It made me feel very good, and it helped both me and my wife. And the other thing that you could do is go to the homepage of this channel and look at the 2 videos, which are called Edinger's Portable Analytic Hour. And that's my reading of Dr. Edinger's work, Encounters with the Self. And it's about the book of Job. It's based on William Blake's 21 engravings about the book of Job. And what it does is it goes through the various phases of things that typically happen in a psyche. And so Dr. Edinger called it his portable analytic hour. And if you listen to that, you'll probably want a copy of that book. And then anytime you're feeling upset, just go back to that book and read through it, and it's amazing what it will do for you. And Dr. Edinger was a psychiatrist. He was educated at Yale. He was a leading Jungian analyst in the late 20th century. Unfortunately, he died in 1998, but he wrote 17 very important books about Jungian psychology. Carlos says, I notice sometimes sometimes project that sort of intensity onto others. How can I curve that intensity, or is it a good thing to develop? I think that it can be a good thing. It's certainly useful for psychotherapists, but if you want to curb it and not come across as so intense, then just consciousness is the way to go. Because if you have it in consciousness, then it's naturally going to start to be curbed by your psyche, and and so I think that's the best answer to that. Um, and obviously, uh, you have to decide what's the right amount. Opiami, Opiami, have you ever listened to Terence McKenna's address to the Young Society? Yes, I have. A while back. Terence McKenna knew a lot of things, and I have nothing bad to say about him. So his videos are here on YouTube, and they're worth listening to. I've got strength. I dreamed once that we'll get released from studies for a day, and as soon as I told this to my friends, our professor came and said, we may go home today. My friend's eyes were so big with surprise. I'll bet they were. But, it's amazing. Sometimes an intuition like that can just come to you unconsciously, and they're very often prophetic. Joy says, can you please explain more in detail, Carlos? Okay, I'm not remembering what Carlos said. So Nia says, I used to explain that holy books helped people as groups at a certain place in a certain time. They may or may not fit a modern person, so it's a personal choice what to believe, trust, or follow. Well, I certainly think that um, that's true in many cases, but also it seems to me that at least in Christian ministry, um, the pastors actually spend a lot of time talking about what was going on uh, 2,000 years ago, because they want you to unconsciously get a teaching. And so even if it couldn't happen today, um, the um, the value of it is to understand it. And so I like the passage. I like the story of Lazarus, who Jesus is reported to have brought back to life. Well, actually, I don't think that Jesus actually, in the physical world, brought Lazarus back to life. But what he did was to go to Lazarus's sister, I think it was, and talk to her about Lazarus and his life, and comment to her about the beauty of his life, the many gifts that he brought in his life. And if you think about it, if a member of your close family has died, and we all have that experience, um, after their death, yes, they're physically gone, but they're still very much with you. I had a younger brother who died from mountain spring water in Vail, Colorado, believe it or not. So I'm a water nut. But anyway, he got an amoebic infection from the Colorado River, and that worked its way up through his colon into his liver, and ultimately it ate his liver, and he had to have um, 3 liver transplants. And ultimately he died. And but my brother is still with me every bit as much as he has been all through my life. And so his spirit still drives me today. And I think that's the message of the Lazarus story. You don't have to believe that Jesus went into this cadaver, this dead body, and says abracadabra, and Lazarus jumps up off the bed and says, "I'm alive again." But Lazarus lives, and he lives to this day. His spirit is still with us in this video because I'm talking about him. And so, just as Jesus is alive today, and so is Muhammad, peace be upon him, um, and so is Beethoven, and so is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. All those people are still with us today, and their spirit is with us today, and so they're very much alive. They're alive within our psyche. They're not physically alive, but that doesn't mean that they're any the less alive. They are part of your life and my life. Um, And so Hunger says, most of my dreams are boring, but then I liked someone, and that someone would appear in my dreams, but still boring. Example, I saw him in the grocery and I said, hello, the end. Well, I don't comment on other people's dreams. But keep in mind that your psyche works with opposites and with psychic energy. And so whatever's happening in your physical life, the opposite may be happening. The compensation for that event may be happening in your psyche. And so dreams are very often compensations that are balancing your self, and that's their role. That's one of their roles. And so that's just a question of whether something is balancing in your psyche. I'm not going to comment further than that. Senator Bush says, I free write quite often, and I write poetry. I read Rilke, Baudelaire, etc., and some of the things I write I write shock me, but and some of the things I write shock me, but are truths about me and my experiences. They are darker, but I realize this, and that's certainly my experience as well, because um, I don't go into it very deeply. But when I wrote my novel, there were certainly some very deep and dark secrets in there, which shocked me and caused me to put that novel in my drawer for 21 years. Ultimately, um, when I can explain them, and now I can explain them, now I I have published that novel on Amazon. It's called Meiko, Meiko, Memoirs of a Woman, by David Garretson, and David Garretson is my pen name. Opiami says, thanks noted. Senator Bush says, my darker side of me, is this healthy or normal within the psyche? Well, it's very normal to have a shadow. And this is what was in the reading of Dr. Stein's book today. And that's why we're talking about persona versus uh, shadow, because they're two sides of, they're two opposites, and you can't have one without the other. It's a syzygy. Now, syzygy is spelled Syzygy, and what syzygy means is yoked together, like yoked together of two oxen that are pulling a cart. And so those two oxen are the two sides of your psyche, and there's psychic energy that runs between them. And so we all have a dark side, And normally we don't want to emphasize that. Most people don't. James Joseph Campbell says, thoughts on Robert Johnson. Honestly, I've never had time to read Robert Johnson. I know he's a very famous Jungian analyst who wrote a lot of valuable books. If I'm not mistaken, he committed suicide. But that's all I know. And what can I say? Carlos says, oh, yeah, I mean, I've started talking to my night terrors, and they usually tell me things I already know or they mock me. It's very powerful and empowering. I look forward to all my dreams now. And, very often I have a dream and I wake up and say to myself, tell me something I don't know. But I saw a quote yesterday from James Hillman, who was also a famous Jungian and was one of the key figures at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich for about 25 years. And James Hillman said, don't analyze your dreams or the things that come up in your dreams. Try to have a conversation with them. And that's what active imagination is that we discussed earlier. So, if a snake comes up in your dream, don't run away with it or from it. Have a conversation with it. And actually, in the Red Book, Dr. Jung does have a conversation with a black snake. Um, and there was a message that was deleted by a Google moderator, and I appreciate the moderation. Opiami, I like him a lot. Um, I, I assume you're talking about Robert Johnson. And okay, so thank you. If we have trolls, please feel free to, next to the troll's name, find the little three dots and report them if they're violating YouTube's terms of service. And but trolls are a demonstration of the shadows, so they're a part of what we're talking about today. Um, and Opiami says the chat is lagging before the stream. I'm sorry for that. Let me just see something here. Okay, we have 37 uh, simultaneous viewers at the time. Nia, to elaborate, I know, of course, some lessons of holy books are universal. I'm just very wary, I think, of the way many people interpret words as absolute and final, as physical facts. And that is a problem with religion because it puts everything over on the rational side. And this is why I read paragraph 63 of Ion um, during this live stream because um, you can have everything over on the rational side, like the zoological description of a duck-billed platypus, but that has nothing to do with how the duck-billed platypus actually lives its life, and the duck-billed platypus doesn't care. Um, GLJ Angel, Opiami, I used to have night terrors and was told to use part of my awareness to remember I was in sleep state, so safe, and using that to walk myself out of the dream nightmare. Um, I think it's important to analyze your dreams. And so if you're having dreams like that, I think it's worthwhile to write them down, remember as much as you can, jot down whatever notes that you can remember when you wake up, and then reflect on that dream because that is your unconscious trying to tell you something. And I can't say what it is. Um, Obviously, I've had plenty of nightmares in my life, and they're not pleasant. I agree with that. And yeah, walking out of it might be an important thing to do. I can't say, but one way to deal with dreams is to write them down and then reflect on what your self is trying to say to you. Um, with practice, it became easier. It happens very rarely now, but when it does, I can walk myself out of it and often remain asleep. Well, great. If you found a solution for yourself, more power to you. Carl is deeply touched by your connection to your brother. And thank you. His name was Samuel, my brother Sam. GLJ, Angel. And by the way, I would say that about my parents as well. My relationship with my parents did not change one whit when they died. And, they're still with me every day in my heart and my psyche. And they influence me every day in the same ways that they have influenced me throughout my life. Angel says, I find that walking through these dreams enables me to notice things that I can take a more objective look at later with once fully awake. Okay, that was my advice as well. I have to go, guys. This has been great. We'll watch the rest later. Bye. And various greetings and goodbyes. Uh, Opiami says, sky, not ox. Women hold other aspect of sky. Very definitely. And um, what we have to understand is that um, when we marry someone, we are bringing the other side of a syzygy into our life. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be exactly the same as us. It means they're going to help us realize our wholeness, whether it's man or woman. And so this is why I have this cup on my desk that says, if a man speaks in the desert and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? And the answer is yes, he is, because he only has half the story. And the spouse, your spouse, or your counterpart, whoever it is, has another part of the story. And in order to achieve wholeness, you need to be conscious of both sides. Um, Nia says, things in my life made me into a maximalist, so I personally feel more like a human. When I'm aware of my flaws, often felt like a robot before realizing it. I'm whole with my shadow, not less, definitely. Opiami Skip, your comments are lagging way before our comments. Yeah, I'm going as fast as I can, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to have to terminate shortly because my voice is giving up, and I have a 2 hour class to give 2 hours from now. So I'm going to have to stop for today. But Payoshni says, I often dream about very old acquaintances and friends in some sort of vivid movie kind of story. I assume that comes from my fear of being alone. I don't know. You need to reflect on those things, and I don't. I make it a policy not to analyze other people's dreams and visions. I do analyze my own sometimes. Um, and Maria says, I can't remember last time I dreamt. I assume I do every night, but can't remember any. What I would say, Maria, is I think we have things coming up from our psyche 7 by 24 by 365, and most of those are fairly trivial things, and they're just compensations where our psyche is balancing for what's happening in our physical life. And so if you're not having many dreams, it might mean that you have a pretty balanced life, and that might be a very good thing. Um, and which means, in the context of what I just said, that your psyche is responding to things that are happening in your physical world, and if everything's in balance, the psychic energy that is involved there is very little, and so it doesn't come into consciousness. But if your psyche really wants to tell you something, it's going to go bang, and it'll pop up a vision or a very vivid dream, and then it's important to pay attention to that. I mean, I often talk about the vision of the police car that I have whenever there's police activity near me, and it never fails, and there's a certain psychic energy there where unconsciously my senses notice something is changing in the environment that means that there's going to be police activity. And when that charge gets big enough, it goes bang and gives me that vision of that police car. And whenever I see that, I slow down, I pay attention, because either I'm going to come upon a speed trap or I'm going to see other police activity. It could be an accident, it could be any number of things, but it invariably happens with me. So I have no need for a radar detector, for example, because I simply know. And I know from that vision. And so, in effect, I have my own radar out there at the unconscious level. I'm not saying I consciously know it, but my psyche just pops that vision up in my consciousness, or I think about the police. If I ever think about the police or see that vision, I immediately pay attention, because I know within 1 to 2 minutes I'm going to see police activity, and I always do. It works 100%. So Carlos says, when writing down my dreams, I have to focus in certain scenarios within it, because if I try to write down the whole dream, it is too long, detailed, and filled with too many characters. It's hard to write down your dreams, and I just sketch out whatever I can get. And sometimes it's just maybe 3 or 4 keywords that have come up, and I need to think about those more. Sometimes I'm able to get a whole scenario, but not that often. I've got strength. Good point, Nia. Also, this reminds me how BTS considers showing their vulnerable side as their strength, because it makes them human in people's eyes. I think that's a very powerful strength for this group. Johann, Mr. Skip, I have noticed an increase in synchronicities in my life since I started following you, and one was actually very profound and a bit scary. Well, that's interesting, and once you are aware of synchronicities, and I'm not going to get into synchronicities today because it's a very complicated subject, but once you are aware of synchronicities, you will see them constantly, and they happen to me every day. I mean, just in the context of the synchronicity of my copy of Dr. Stein's book arriving here yesterday, and we had that hassle with the hackers yesterday, and I opened this book just sort of randomly, and there was the story about persona versus shadow and integrating the shadow. And so that helped me quite a bit by synchronicity, because if you were here yesterday, you saw me get kind of angry and flustered by the fact that the hackers were interfering with our conversation. And ultimately, I just shut down the stream. But then by synchronicity, this book came, I opened it to this page, and now I say, bring on the hackers. They're just the shadow, and they're a demonstration and experience of exactly what Dr. Stein is talking about. So, Nia says, the most prevalent meaningful dream I have a few times is being in town, lost, not getting anywhere, and having no voice. I know what the dream means, thankfully. It still shakes me up every time. People have repetitive dreams often, and I don't really have anything more to say about that. Opiami ditched the screen. It gave me a headache just saying. Joseph Campbell, would you further elaborate, Johann? Opiami audio, every moment equals synchronicity. Um, yeah, I mean, there's the potential for synchronicity all the time because what synchronicity refers to is an causal connecting principle. So things connect up all the time. Let's see here. Where are we? Okay. So I think I've gotten to the bottom of the chat for now. I'm going to apologize because I don't like to turn things off when we have so many people listening live. Let me just say that I would very much appreciate if you're going to like something that I say on Twitter here, that you also retweet it because that helps get the word out, and I'd appreciate getting the word out. Um, Also, I do a live stream every Monday evening at 8 p.m. We've done 122 of those over the last 3 years, and all of those are available on this channel. And so, if you want a sort of a basic course in bringing you along on Jungian psychology, go back to JRG1. That's the playlist, and listen through those videos. You'll start to see me develop my whole teaching about basic Jungian psychology. And then there's JRG2, which was year 2 and 3, which is the year that I'm currently in. And so all of the videos from live streams, or even before I was live streaming, are available because I was video recording um, all of the sessions from the very beginning, even when I wasn't live streaming. So uh, you can find all those, and and I do run a advanced reading group every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. If you can't be live at that time, you can also catch it on playback. I urge you to join our advanced reading group. You'll find information about that in the description of this video. Just send me a message. You can send it via Twitter at skip_Conover, and we can talk about how to get you in the advanced group. In the advanced group, we have already done a full seminar of 32 sessions on this book, Ion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self. We completed that about 3 months ago, and currently we're working on Mysterium Conjunctionis, which was Dr. Jung's last major work. It's volume 14 of the collected works, and I'm estimating we have, I think, 9 sessions on the Dropbox now in replay. We do this on Zoom, and so the replays are not on this channel. They are only for members of the advanced reading group. And so you get access to that if you're interested. So today we're doing our 10th session on Mysterium Conjunctionis, which I expect to take me about a year. So I think we're up to paragraph 133 of 750 paragraphs so far. Nia says, I used to explain that holy books help people as groups at a certain... Oh, okay, wait a minute, I'm way back. Somehow I got pushed back. Grace says, so awesome to see everyone here. Yes, I agree entirely. Um, and Joseph Campbell... Nia says, I've sent your videos to a few people I know, and I'm not very active on Twitter, but I try spreading your channel as much as my circles go. And thank you for that. I appreciate whatever you can do. It certainly helps me. And Gray says, Skip is a wonderful guy. Thank you, Gray. Gray is a longtime friend of mine, so I appreciate that. Maria, thanks, Skip, for the time and knowledge. Uh, Angel, thanks always, Skip. I hope your throat recovers. Gray, Skip, don't forget that your answer to Job on YouTube is a depth work as well. That was kind of the birthplace of the advanced group. And so, yes, Gray, thank you for that reminder. So I've done a bunch of things on Answer to Job. First of all, I read it entirely, and that reading is available on the YouTube channel. You can listen to it entirely. I have also read Edward Edinger's commentary on Answer to Job, and I also ran a, a multi-month seminar on Answer to Job, and that's on the YouTube channel. So if you go to the main channel page for this channel, the home page, now if you go scroll down, you'll see a playlist for Answer to Job, and you can find all that material there. And I've got strings says, I'm just trying to keep up with these new live streams. Uh, Going to finally start coloring my coloring notebook because of yesterday's session. Great. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, I need to stop at this point. And if you're in our advanced reading group, I'll see you again at 1:30. And if you're not, I urge you to join, and please do retweet when you get a chance. Thank you for joining me today, and I've got strength. I want to apologize for flooding information here, but when I realized that BTS is coming out with this album and how important it would be, I knew that it was going to be very, very important to get some things out that are useful to the BTS Army. And so many of these things are rather superficial in Jungian psychology. Dr. Stein's book, which the album is based on, is really a book that was intended for laymen, and it's a very good book, but it isn't the depth that Dr. Jung gets into, and so after you've gotten enough interest in Dr. Jung's work, you can go extremely deep, and as I say,